Hello, everyone. Welcome to this under this virtual tent and this unusual, particular time of year, this unusual year. In any December, we would be thinking this is the end of the year. What's happened in the last year? Why has this year been different? And looking ahead to the next year and thinking about what might come next. And this feels particularly, those sort of feelings of end of the year and hope and future feel particularly pertinent this year, I think. Has anyone been vaccinated? Does anyone know anyone who's been vaccinated? I have a cousin who is a doctor in Scotland, and he's been vaccinated, and he's been very proudly telling everyone exactly how it feels. Slightly sore in his shoulder, apparently. We should not worry. He hasn't turned into a lizard or anything yet. But there's a sense that people are, vaccinations are going in. There is that's almost that light at the end of the tunnel. Many of us would have been thinking of Christmas as being much more free than maybe it will be, and maybe lots of us preparing for quite an unusual Christmas and feeling like we're not getting the kind of festive time that we usually have. But we're thinking, there is a sense that 2021 could maybe be different. And those of us who work in climate change, 2020 was going to be the big climate super year. It was going to be one of those climate super years that we have periodically and have had periodically since about 1989. But it was going to be a really big one. We were going to, solve a lot of problems, and a lot of that stuff's been put on hold. But I certainly feel as a climate campaigner that, okay, we're going to have a different climate super year. It's going to be 2021. But 2021 has the potential to not just catch up for all of the things that we didn't do in 2020, but actually take us even further than we might have had. And so that's where I think we sit now, as we sit in a difficult time still after a very painful year with possibly more pain ahead. And, if those of us who think about climate change, it's never very easy. It's never really hopeful. It's one of the challenges of climate change is, in a way, you can't win because you've already lost. It's all about just sort of mitigating further losses and thinking about how we can minimize pain. But at the same time, there is that kind of light at the end of the tunnel that this particular period may be starting to shift, and that things have shifted, and that we've seen things shift quite immensely in the last year. And so what are we going to do with this world that what's this new world that is going to re-emerge? What are we going to do with it? What are the challenges that will be ahead of us? But what are also the fresh opportunities? One of the things I think has been most striking for me as a climate campaigner through the last year has been that climate change hasn't dropped off the public agenda, that people are still clear, the British public in particular, are clearly committed to climate action, and that some of the most interesting work continues to be happening at a local level. And we've had this big international climate summit in the last week, and there's the usual great announcements from the great and the good. We hear this time of year, we always have a lot of research published and scientists telling us stuff about climate change. We also have politicians speaking about it. But we know, those of us who work on climate change at community level, that what the politicians say and the scientists say and the businessmen say is all very, very important. It will only work if local communities are working together to take action and to be talking about the changes that will happen in their lives because of climate change and problem solving at a local level. So we're going to hear from three great speakers today about that. We've got Luke from the IPPR, and Natalie from the House of Lords, and Mark from Lawrence Weston in Bristol. And the first two speakers, I think, are going to give us, in slightly different ways, a nice political overview. And then we'll finally hear from Mark, who can tell us, on a very local level, on the ground of work that he's actually involved in, although I'm sure he will help us put it in a bigger picture as well. So first off, we have Luke from the IPPR, and he is, sorry, I have got three documents open and I need to have my Luke Murphy is head. I just wanted to make sure I got your job title correct, because it's always important that we do this. I always hate it when people give me my wrong job title. Luke Murphy is head of Environmental Justice Commission, as well as being associate director for the Energy, Climate, Housing and Infrastructure team at the IPPR. And Luke has done, one of the many things that he has done is research with the local trust on community climate action, and I think that's one of the things he's going to talk to us about today. So Luke, your 7 minutes start now.
Fantastic, and thanks very much. And it's great to be here to talk about research. Yeah, you definitely need it in front of you, because the job title is far too long, and for anyone it barely measures repeating. As Alice said, I'm head of the Environmental Justice Commission at IPPR, and just a little bit about that. It's a cross-party commission which is focused on how you put people at the heart of tackling climate change and restore nature, as well as looking at how we can achieve our climate and nature objectives, while also tackling wider economic and social injustices. And it's co-chaired by Caroline Lucas from the Green Party, Laura Sands from the Conservatives, and Hilary Benn from the Labour Party as well. And we've been really pleased to work with Local Trust on a piece of research that was really focused looking at how communities can thrive in a climate changing world. And I just wanted to say a little bit about why communities, why we think it's important in terms of the argument of why it's important to put communities at the heart of this and how they can thrive. Secondly, say a little bit about what action is being taken that we found from our research across the country. And thirdly, looking at some of the important outcomes that we've seen come from this action. And lastly, a little bit about the emerging challenges and barriers that we've seen that need to be overcome to kind of really ramp up that action. So firstly, why communities? Well, I think, as many would recognise, progress on tackling climate change has largely happened in the background up until now, largely through decarbonising our power sector. But what's to come next, as I think everyone knows, is going to affect people's everyday lives in a way that all communities will see and feel. So because of that, we would certainly argue that we do need much greater involvement of the public and communities than we have to date, and we need to ensure that we're maximising the benefits and minimising the risks for those that might otherwise lose out. So that involvement is going to see us actively build support for action on climate and nature. It's going to broaden the coalition. And if we help tackle existing injustices rather than making them worse, then we won't build the opposition that we've seen in some areas of the world. A lot of people refer to the Gilets jaunes in France. But I think more than that, and I think most importantly, that one of the findings from our research is that it's not just about building public support or avoiding building opposition. It's actually that by giving communities greater local ownership and control, not just over the process, but actually over the assets themselves, will make for better policy and fairer outcomes. So it's about more than just building support. It is about actually delivering better outcomes. So in terms of what action is being taken, we've done literature reviews, we've done interviews with community organisations across the UK and with funders as well, to try and understand the type of action that's actually going on. And we found a whole variation of projects, and not all of them are bannered strictly as climate projects. And I think this is one of the key lessons actually that we've identified, is that not every community that's been working on some of these issues necessarily sees themselves as actively tackling climate change, even if they are undertaking projects that are having a fundamentally beneficial effect on it and indeed in restoring nature. So yes, you have the typically things that I think most people reach for, like community-owned renewable energy projects, which I think most people have seen or experienced and certainly heard most about, and that can range from small scale solar rooftop projects to larger commercial developments. And importantly, these aren't just controlled and approved by local communities, but they also share the profits amongst the local community as well, which is then reinvested into similar projects for the community benefit. But then we've also got community supported agriculture projects, which offer local communities access to the land, more local jobs than traditional schemes. And that's seen lower emissions and adverse impacts on the environment. But they're not always started with climate objectives or the restoration of nature in mind. Likewise, community low carbon housing and land trusts are a really good example. Actually, community land trusts across the country are quite often developed and begun because people want greater ownership over their housing. They wanted to see greater affordability, but we're also seeing that actually they're taking care to ensure that those homes are being built to low carbon standards and principles. So there's Goodwin Development Trust in Hull, which is developing 60 social homes as part of a local community land trust, and all of those homes are being built to high energy efficiency standards. But it wasn't necessarily begun with a vision to tackle climate change, but it is doing it while they're doing it. There's then community-led safe streets and travel initiatives. We've got electric car clubs, EV charging points, and walking and cycling initiatives all being created and introduced by local communities. Circular economy initiatives, we've got over 100 repair cafes across the UK, and things like Library of Things. Community climate resilience and adaptation. There's a fantastic community project called Slowing the Flow at Pickering in Yorkshire, which is a community-based initiative looking at introducing nature-based measures to address flooding. And finally, things like rewilding and community-owned woodland projects as well. So 7 of the most important outcomes we've learned, other than just tackling climate change and restoring nature, has been all of these projects, as well as doing those things, have, and there's 7 things here. Firstly, creating community wealth and building local economic resilience. Secondly, building community ownership and management of assets through these projects. Improving the quality of their local places and where people are living as well. Fourthly, building local agency. Fifthly, increasing social resilience. Sixthly, relocalising. And lastly, increasing that political mandate for action on climate and restoring nature. But finally, I'm just getting a time warning, so I'm gonna wrap up by talking a little bit around the challenges and barriers, because I think while we've seen a huge amount of examples, we're looking at the report will be released early next year, of all the types of actions that's being created. I think we would argue that actually communities are being held back by the current framework and current challenges that lie in place at the moment. Firstly, it's about how you frame it and the kind of vision for action you set out. Not everyone immediately is motivated by the need to tackle climate crisis, although it's a high matter of concern. Actually, when aligning it with some of the perceived shared interests and framing it around the local interests of a local community, that can help drive additional action. Secondly, inclusion and diversity. Too often it's perceived to be an activity taking place in well-off neighbourhoods, and it can suffer from a lack of diversity, so that clearly needs to be overcome. Thirdly, volunteer engagement. There's a limit to the amount of time and who can take part if it's purely reliant on volunteers. So there is a need for greater funding and resources to support communities to deliver these projects. Fourthly, a need for external professional support on planning, on feasibility, on business development and funding, all are needed to help grow the sector and community action. And lastly, funding support and an improved national policy context. And the national policy context is a major constraint. It doesn't deliver the enabling governance, funding or policy frameworks to allow community action to flourish. But when we take a step back and look at the overall message of the report and the research that we've done, is that there is a huge amount going on. It's not all necessarily directed at climate and restoring, tackling climate change, but all of them are having a beneficial effect in doing so. But we need the enabling policies and funding in order to deliver it. And sometimes we need to recognise that projects that aren't labelled as climate projects or nature projects are necessarily not delivering the kind of climate action that we want to see. And they are actually delivering better outcomes for the local communities because they're designed, involving, and give ownership to the local communities themselves. I'll stop there.
Thanks so much. There's loads there that will, I'm sure, link with some of the other speakers, and we can pull out in the questions as well. Next up, we have Natalie Bennett, and I don't need to go and check for her job title because I do know it off the top of my head. Baroness Natalie Bennett, who's former Green Party leader and current Green Party peer. Over to you, Natalie.
Well, thank you very much, Alice, and thank you, Luke, too. It's great to follow both of what the comments that you've made and hopefully to build on them and to very much agree with them. And starting with your comments, Alice, I think it was really important to focus on hope. Obviously, this is a difficult time and a difficult Christmas. But as you said, things are not going to be the same in the future as they are now. And that's really good news, because basically we have been trashing the planet and creating a really miserable, poverty-racked society with huge levels of mental ill health, and with huge amounts of suffering and huge amounts of people really fearing for the future. And that's all before COVID, before we even get to COVID. So, you know, a little thought experiment to run. If we'd been creating this absolutely wonderful society, everything's been working out perfectly, and then we suddenly found we had the climate emergency, and we've got to change everything. Politically, that would be really difficult. But because what we've been doing now so clearly hasn't been working, not just on climate terms, but in so many other terms, this is a real opportunity to build something better, to bring things forward into a different kind of world. And when it comes to climate policies, so many of them aren't just climate policies. They're what I call super policies. What could possibly be wrong with the idea of everybody having a warm, comfortable, affordable heat home? The best possible energy you can have, the greenest, cleanest, cheapest energy you can have, is the energy that you don't need to use. If we have our rural villages actually have genuine bus services that people are able to get around, that means not only can people leave their cars at home, maybe think about not having a car, but it also means that the people who can't drive for whatever reason, whether it's finances or disabilities or whatever, or age, it means they've also got the access, the chance for mobility. So what we're talking about are these super policies of making things better. And underlying this is a kind of basic principle of that there are, we often have, and this is something that the far right, that extreme political forces will often say, it's a difficult, dangerous world, so we've got to grab what we can for us and ours and shove those others away, whoever those others are. The other way, what my perspective is there's enough resources on this planet for everyone to have a decent life, for a much better life than we have now, for everyone to have access to those resources, and for us to look after the planet, both the climate and nature, if we just share them out fairly. And that message of hope is, I think, really important. And I was just thinking, as I was we were thinking about community resources, community power. And I think there's not really anything like enough understanding in the UK that we are by far the most centralised political system in Europe, and indeed most of the world. I'm speaking to you now from my office in Westminster, and so many decisions, even at quite a very local level, are made here. And even those decisions are far too centralised in county councils, in devolved authorities, Manchester Mayor, Greater Manchester Mayor sort of levels. And I was thinking, because we're seeing the Met Bureau, the Met Office is warning that we're facing the real risk of flooding perhaps after Christmas. I was thinking back to being in Cumbria a couple of years ago and visiting a little village where a whole row of houses had been flooded. Basically, it was just right on the edge whether it would come over their doorsteps and come in. And talking to the local parish council, they'd said, well, what was causing the water to rise a bit more was people driving down this road, and that was creating waves. And we wanted to close the road, but the county council said, no, we didn't have the power to do that. And if they did that, they'd sue us, and it was all terrible. And the people on the ground who knew exactly what was happening, who knew what needed to be done, just didn't have the power to do it. And we need to make sure that power is devolved down locally and only referred upward when it's absolutely necessary. And talking about thinking about community-owned energy, and that, it's kind of one of the obvious things to talk about in this space. But it's such a difference. And I think of a great little book I'm going to recommend, and I say little advisedly because I've often, people hand me a 600-page report and say, would you like to read this? To which the realistic answer is no. But there's a great little book called Flat Pack Democracy, which describe what happened in the town council in Frome, and so many great case studies there. But visiting there, the kind of things I saw there was they found an empty shop and started up a library of things, where I learnt the invaluable fact that the average electric drill is used for 15 minutes in its lifetime. But because of that local action, that strong local power, they set up this place where you could go when you just needed to put up a shelf, go and borrow the drill, and then take it back. And of course, that saved you a lot of money, also saved an awful lot of environmental impacts, and was very, very practical. And the same thing in Frome, they had put solar panels on the roof of the doctor's surgery, very big, broad roof. And they'd also, through that, got a electric car club car that was powered by it. the doctor's surgery got its bills cut, and all of that arranged through local action. So there's so many possibilities, so many exciting things that people can do on the ground. And just to finish on one final area, because I think we don't talk about, in terms of community things, we don't talk about food as much as we possibly might. And having just been through the agriculture bill and about to get into the environmental bill and ELM's environmental land management schemes and farming and everything, I think we need to do a lot more work, community campaigning, grassroots work on food, because everybody eats. The nature of food is very important to everyone. And this is another super policy area, because we have a huge problem with obesity, diabetes, unhealthy diets. A healthy diet costs 3 times as much as an unhealthy diet does. And there's a temptation, and this is perhaps the perspective of some sides of politics, to blame individuals. But the fact is, it's really very difficult. And community action, if we restore the ring of market gardens around towns and cities, that's around most places, potentially scores of small independent businesses, hundreds of jobs, not just the growing jobs, but the jobs to run the website, to market the food, the fruit and veg box scheme. All of these things are great opportunities to build strong local economies. And that's what we need. Development is all too often thought of as the big injection of money from outside that directs how things happen in a town. If we build up from the grassroots instead, strong local economies, money goes round and round in the town, the fruit and veg is sold by the local greengrocer, that local greengrocer employs a local sign writer when she needs a new sign, employs a local carpenter when she needs some new shelves, employs a local accountant. That's the kind of image we have to look forward to, is strong local economies living in the physical limits of the planet, giving people a much better life. But what it is built on very much is democracy, on that local power to make decisions, to work out what's right for the direction of travel of that community. And we're seeing it happen on a small scale. We've got to make sure it can happen everywhere, in places, whatever their level of social capital, whatever their financial position. And if you think about what that Britain looks like, it's so much better life than we have now, and so much better for the environment, with a restored natural world and living within the overall climate limits. Thanks very much.
Thank you. So we've already had both speakers pulling out how, start talking about climate change, and you have to talk about so many other different things, and often there's so many other different things to talk about. From an office in Westminster, we are now going to a old youth centre in the outskirts of North Bristol, to Lawrence Weston, which is a housing estate just in the north of Bristol, and Mark Pepper, who is the development lead for development manager for the Ambition Lawrence Weston. So Ambition Lawrence Weston is a recipient of local trust funding. And they are, they're pretty well known within those of us who do community climate action, know Lawrence Weston particularly, because they have been successful in onshore wind in a way that it's very difficult to be successful in onshore wind in England, and they're managing to do it. They're also well known for their solar. But I think Mark's going to talk to us about slightly more interesting things than just solar and wind, although I'm sure he'd be happy to pick up on those in the questions. So over to you, Mark, over to Bristol.
Thank you, Alice. Hello all, good morning everyone. Let's see if I'm unmuted. Yes. Good morning, everyone. So yeah, sorry, but I haven't got any fancy or pretty slides to show you. That's because spending time on creating slides was not my priority. And that bland statement about priorities sums up the talk I'm about to give you. So yeah, my name's Mark Pepper. I'm a lifelong resident of a housing estate in North Bristol called Lawrence Weston. I'm also development manager for Ambition Lawrence Weston, a grassroots resident-led and driven development trust set up in 2012 to address the issues we have suffered for many years. Now, Lawrence Weston is fairly small, with about 7,500 residents living in about 3,200 homes, suffering with historic high levels of deprivation. I won't bang on about the poverty and deprivation, as I'm sure you've all heard it before, low health outcomes, high poverty, low educational attainment, low skilled, unsecure jobs, blah, 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 blah. I could go on and on and on. But I think most of you know what I mean. So that's a little bit about my home, Lawrence Weston. So I've been asked to talk about the power that local communities have to tackle climate change. Well, before 2012, we felt we had no power. We felt disempowered, disengaged, and ignored by decision makers and other stakeholders. Back then, we didn't have a joined up voice. We didn't engage with local democracy. We didn't engage with local and national politics. We just sat here allowing things to be done to us and not with us, just moaning and complaining, but not getting off our asses and doing anything about it. But in 2012, we were stripped of yet another asset, as we had seen many other assets being stripped or services being removed over the years. But this latest asset they stripped from us held a lot of emotional tie, as it was a formal school, then a college, and a community space. And this, I think, was the straw that broke the camel's back and motivated many residents to come together to try and improve our lot. So very briefly, we carried out door-to-door consultations with the community and created a resident written community plan. That gave confidence to funders like the Lottery's Big Local Programme, who gave us, the residents, some funds to help deliver the community plan. We then went on to deliver several other things like an economic development plan, a neighbourhood development plan. And as a result, we now have more power and influence over our own destiny. The community plan gave us a voice that carried influence with the local authority. The Localism Act allowed us our neighbourhood development plan. So we now had more say over what, where and how built developments take place in Lawrence Weston. And also gave us increased community infrastructure levy payments, money, which is very, really important. And then Big Local gave us resources and funds that has led to more power or influence, as we can now pay for local people like me to get involved and bring in the expertise and knowledge and skills we needed to deliver our very aspirational plans. But in those resident written plans, there was absolutely no mention of climate change whatsoever. So why would we choose to use our limited power, influence, resource, energy, or time on climate issues? You see, the problem we had was we felt as though lots of people were lecturing to us about what we had to do and how much of a priority it was. We were being told, and correctly so, that thousands and thousands of miles away, polar bear caps are melting. Polar bears are becoming more homeless. They demanded that we have to reduce our carbon footprint, use public or other sustainable transport. We need to change the way we work and live. There is no greater priority than climate change, we were constantly being told. Well, for some of us, climate change was, and maybe for some still is, far down the list on our priorities. Our priority is ensuring we have enough electric on our key meters to stop the food in our freezers from melting, never mind the ice thousands of miles away, paying the rent to stop us from being homeless, never mind the polar bears becoming homeless. Our priority is to try and afford to put our gas boilers on and have more than 2 radiators trying to keep our kids warm, never mind our carbon footprints. Don't get me wrong, we know there's a climate emergency, and there has been for some time, but we have failed to approach it in the right joined up strategic way that we feel is needed. We didn't feel as though we were that responsible for climate emergency, as it's not us that fly in planes 3, 4, 5 times a year. We struggle to turn the gas on, let alone heat the whole of our homes. So we felt as though we weren't to blame, but we're being told by others to fix the problem that we felt we didn't really cause. We also thought, rightly or wrongly, that people lecturing or telling us this were perhaps from mainly middle-class privileged backgrounds who could afford to change the way they live, could afford to take time off work, to demonstrate, to make their point by causing disruption to transport and buses that people from my area rely on to get them to work, to hospital, to friends and family. Some actions from some movements had unintended negative consequences that didn't help to take communities like mine with them on their journey or cause. So through our work, we in Lawrence Weston are trying to change this by addressing our community's priorities first, but at the same time bringing added climate value in meeting those priorities in a stealth sort of way. From things like ensuring that the new housing is sustainable with good energy efficiency through our neighbourhood development plan, to ensuring improved sustainable transport infrastructure is delivered, to delivering a community young wind turbine. The list goes on and are all based on residents' priorities for other reasons, mainly poverty and money. But again, we were doing this from a starting point of meeting our own priorities, knowing that doing so would improve climate change for the better, as we're then engaging our residents, allowing them to set their own agenda and giving climate awareness and education at the same time without ramming it down their throats. So when we support our residents with, for say example, their gardening project, who just want to make the place look pretty, we can then have a conversation about biodiversity and what other plants they can grow to help with the climate changes we need, but still and always meeting their first original priority. That was quite a simple example, but hopefully you get the ideal and strategy behind it. This strategy is working for us. We now have a part in a share in a large community-owned solar farm. We have secured Secretary of State planning approval for what we believe will be the biggest wind turbine in England and owned by us. We have supported other wind turbines to be delivered. All of that was not for climate reasons initially, but for economic reasons. We have funded a private shuttle bus to get our residents to places of employment where previously there was no public transport. Again, not climate driven, but for other reasons. We were building a new £1.7 million community hub to house, among other things, a renewable energy and climate skills academy to encourage a just energy transition. And we have succeeded in demanding all new housing is as energy efficient as possible, and have influenced the local authority to build passive houses in our area, as well as delivering 38 of our own affordable, extremely highly energy efficient homes, as well as facilitating many different groups that, as a secondary priority, are making a positive impact on climate, or at least reducing the harm currently being caused. I will end just by saying we believe using this strategy will empower all left behind communities like ours can benefit climate change action if approached in this way. So meeting our own priorities first, whilst addressing climate issues alongside it, we believe will be the secret of our success in delivering on ongoing sustainable climate change action, whilst also reducing the inequality gap and social injustice that we currently suffer. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Lots of people putting up clapping icons or clapping. I don't know if you can see that, Mark, but clearly people feeling the need to give you a big round of applause. It's a great way to end those three talks. Right, we've got about 25 minutes for questions, and I've had some sent in advance, but also do use the chat function to ask a question. But first, I had a question as a kind of warm up from Local Trust, just for all three of you. It's an ongoing question, and I don't expect you to know the exact right answer, but I'll be very keen to hear what your thoughts are on what can we do to encourage grassroots action on climate change that empowers communities rather than just say this is what you should do. You know, what can we do to foster more of this community-led work, which doesn't just take something that's given to people, but goes, right, this is what it means to us. Anybody got any notes on what we should do, what we would like to see either communities doing, groups like Big Lottery doing, or politicians doing, or each other doing? Luke, Natalie, Mark, anyone want to jump in?
I'm happy to come in on that. I mean, I think one of the things is I'll draw a case study from up in Bradford, a very poor community on the edges of the Bradford local authority. And there was some big central government money came into, they decided what this community needed was a adventure playground. This adventure playground just got dumped on the community with no consultation whatsoever. Within about 18 months, the last element of it was vandalised. The site was then taken over by a couple of social workers who'd actually been made redundant by the local council because of austerity and cutbacks. And they started, finding a little bit of money from a trust here, a little bit of money from a grant there, and they started building the site up again. Local people were doing the work. Local people were deciding what they actually wanted on the site, what their kids needed. They got some money to fence it, and because it started from the grassroots up, what happened was now, the social workers were telling me that, anytime anyone goes onto the site, they immediately, any time of the day or night, they get a dozen phone calls from locals saying, oh, there's someone on the site, you might want to come around and check what's happening. And, it's being really protected. Local people feel like they own it. So I would say, rather than looking at, dumping £1 million on one place and saying, we know what you need, here it is. If you can just, find some good people, say to them, get involved, give them a trickle of money and build it up and allow, make sure the decision making is made at that absolutely grassroots level. There's just no point in dumping something on people. It has to grow organically, if you like, to use a metaphor.
Thanks. Luke or Mark, do you have any, I mean, in some ways that's very much the local trust model, but I don't know if you have anything else to add, Luke?
I mean, actually, I fully agree with everything Natalie said. So I mean, it's kind of just reiterating that really, and I think that's what our research found, and certainly that's what I think what we've just heard from Mark as well. It's allowing the community to identify their own priorities, not telling them what you think they should be, but providing them with the enabling resources and services and engagement that they need to kind of deliver on their own priorities. And also, I think quite often, it goes back to my original point, it's about more than just giving people like a voice through consultation. It is about, or indeed just ownership over the decision-making process. It's genuine control and ownership over the end assets, because that is how, as Mark was saying, that's how the community then genuinely shares in the wider benefits that accrue from these kind of projects. So, you know, I mean, I don't know that much about it, but I think an interesting thing, I think announced today or yesterday by Barking and Dagenham Council, is the idea of a community endowment fund, which sounds to me like it's a fund that is going to kind of allow the local communities to identify their priorities, rather than this kind of piecemeal handing out of money either by central or local government for particular projects that they think should be local communities' priorities.
Thanks. Mark, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, if I could just jump in. Yeah, totally agree with Luke and the other speaker, Natalie. I mean, the secret to our success really was, you know, attempts to regenerate our area have been attempted before in the past through many different programs like SRB, neighbourhood renewal, blah, blah, blah. Big Local came along and gave that money for the residents to spend. That encouraged a lot of us a real genuine reason to get involved. In the past, it was just tokenistic views that they were taking from us, and we never really got what we wanted. This place-based funding has really changed that. It's given a reason for people to get involved. We do feel a hell of a lot more empowered. And more importantly, the opportunities that we could see for many years in our local area through those natural assets and other assets that Luke was talking about, we can really realise them now. Because a lot of you know, agendas that came in that wanted to address certain things didn't look at the place as a place, and it was just, you know, typically rolled out across the country or whatever. But now we can take advantage of those local opportunities that we've known have been here for a long time, i.e. a wind turbine. There's no better people to know how windy it is than us who live here. We know the space, we know the area. The solar farm's exactly the same. Yeah, so it's empowering the residents of communities like mine that have had the secret to the success that Big Local have brought. And to answer the question just slightly, I think I did say in my speech, I think you need to concentrate on the people's priorities and then deliver the climate alongside that, the climate changes alongside that. That's all I can say from my community anyway.
No, that's brilliant, thank you. So as a next question, I wanted to see if Chris Poynton, who's a data lead from Cambridgeshire Climate Emergency, had a question that they sent in. I wondered if Chris, would you be up for asking that question yourself? Seem to be in the audience. Is Chris here?
To my embarrassment, I don't remember the question that I submitted.
Maybe do you have another question?
I think it's sort of as an observation on the conversation so far, and it's been really interesting. It feels like I've heard this conversation many times about the desperate need to empower communities, but I think we've seen it on the way through the connection of how empowering communities happens, and the sort of activation of communities to accept that power has been quite a sticking point. And sort of our national government is sort of proved through the COVID crisis that its ability to actually act in conjunction with local communities and put in place sort of national policies through a local lens has been challenged. I'm just wondering, I'm looking for sort of examples where this has cut through, where there is this end-to-end situation happening, because what we're trying to do in Cambridge is train community organisers to start to generate change in their own communities, but also to help them interface with mechanisms of power, the power structures that are around. And honestly, it's tough, and we're finding we don't have some really good resources to help us do that. So I'm really interested to hear what people have seen as sort of examples of best practice.
That's a great question, because yeah, it is. I mean, I totally agree. It is really tough. Is that something any of the three speakers have got anything to add on? Either a case study from some of your research, Natalie? Yeah.
Well, I was just going to, it's not exactly a parallel, but I was just sitting, as we've been talking about, getting community empowerment, getting community involved and active. One of the things that it's a group called, it's a Brighton and Hove food, it's not scheme, but sorry, I've forgotten the exact title, but it's a Brighton and Hove food project that works with people with mental health issues, people with drug and alcohol problems, etc. And they had what I thought was a really wonderful principle that I think is a real foundation for how to approach all of this. Was, we've talked about consultation, we've talked about people getting involved and empowered, but very often you're asking people whose lives are already really stretched by caring responsibilities, by juggling 3 0-hour contract jobs, etc., to then volunteer their time as well. And that's really enormously difficult. And what this Brighton and Hove food project does is it tries to ensure that everyone it involves in consultations, everyone who gives time as a client, but also as an expert to the project, they get some kind of return. So they try and pay if they can. They can't always do that. They give vouchers. One of the things they do is they take, if they go and give a presentation, at a conference or something, they try to take one of the people who informed the work they're presenting on along as well, to speak from their own personal experience, but also get the experience of going to that conference, of speaking to that conference, of meeting the people at that conference. So I think very often what you get is a room with a line of paid experts in suits, very often men in suits up the front, and a whole lot of community people who have had to move heaven and earth to get themselves to that meeting, to volunteer their time. Change the allocation of resources round and actually allocate the resources rather than to those experts, allocate the resources so that people really get something concrete out of their involvement. And that means, of course, those people then also have that money or that voucher or whatever in their pocket if they can spend it locally. You're putting the resources into the community. You're not taking a project, paying the outside experts and the money. You never even really see the money in the community at all.
Luke or Mark, have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I think there were a number of examples actually in the research which kind of outline the different challenges which different community groups and organisations have faced in places across the country, and each faces in some respects their own unique challenges, but there are then those kind of common those common themes, and I think as Natalie highlighted, 3 of them are around the volunteer engagement and the limited amount of time that people can have to take part, and the need to actually recognise that and support it and potentially pay for it, and that need, as Natalie said again, to provide that external professional support around planning, feasibility, business development and funding, as I said earlier, but there are good examples of where different organisations have overcome these challenges. And I think my message is I'm more than happy to kind of share our research after this. It's going to be published in January, which kind of sets out some of the some good case studies of where organisations face particular challenges and then overcome them.
Mark, do you have anything to add on this?
Yeah, I can only give an example, a feedback from our experience and like what I said in some of the talk that I give. We feel a lot more empowered now as a result of many things. One is we've got a really supportive local administration. So, we're getting listened to a lot. We've took advantage of the Localism Act in delivering a neighbourhood development plan. We've got a really detailed community plan. But I'll arc back to what Natalie said, and that is about relying on volunteers. And that's what we've done in the past, and we failed terribly simply because they haven't got the mindset or the space in their minds. They got other priorities, they got work, caring, blah, 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 blah. So what Big Local's done, again, I'll revert back to that, they've enabled our community to pay local residents to do that work. We then can, although we haven't got the skills, the experience or knowledge or the expertise to do some of the aspirational, challenging things that we're intending to do, like a wind turbine, solar farm, community buildings, we have got the resources to pull in those skills, and it's our residents that are driving that project forward. So we're instructing those consultants, those architects, those solicitors, for the benefit of us, basically. So yeah. It does take a lot of work. I don't think you can expect volunteers to do that. You need to have paid employees. Exactly what we've done is all of our employees are locally based. They all live in the area. They all know the area. They've all got a vested interest in the area. And because of that, you get a lot more out of them. You know, they're not worried if they're working overtime for no money. As long as they can pay their bills, they'll fully commit. And that's how we've done it. It was very complicated because we haven't got the skills. I mean, the neighbourhood development plan process, for example, I don't think that was really set up for communities like mine. It was more set up for village greens, in, not to get political, but in Tory heartlands, where you have got architects, planners, solicitors, lawyers living who can give up their time, who can afford to do that. But with the beauty of big local and putting any sort of finance in control with the residents, gives them, you know, a level playing field, so to speak.
I think some planning experts struggled with that particular bit of legislation. If I remember rightly, we did a survey of planning experts and they were also quite puzzled. Which is one of the many reasons why everyone thinks that what you're doing with wind is so great. I've got another question. I know that Big Tent likes to do things on a very practical level and thinking about practical. So I've got a very practical question. New Year's resolutions. What, you know, looking towards the new year, if communities want to take action on climate change, what do you think should be their 1 or 2 priorities that they would start first for? I know this is a classic question that anyone in climate change gets asked, what would you do first? And you're like, well, there's a long list, but all right, I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm going to mix up the order a bit. So Mark first, I'm going to put you on the spot. What one or if someone came to you and go, we want to be like you, where would you tell them to start?
Well, I would suggest that we haven't got as far as what we want to do at the moment. We haven't got a climate action plan. So we don't really know what sort of climate action our residents want to get involved with. I have said that we're just going to focus on their priorities and then stealthily bring that in. But we've been fortunate to join a collaboration with 6 other communities in Bristol, along with the local authority and Bristol Green Capital, to make a collaborative funding application bid to the Climate Action Fund, the Lottery's Climate Action Fund. And that is now give us separate finances to go out and consult with our community around devising a climate action plan. So until I get that feedback from our residents, I've got no answers to give you, I'm afraid.
That's a good one. It's ask people first. Luke, what about you?
I'd say 3 things. One is, I think, you know, as I outlined earlier, there's such a multitude of different kind of climate projects out there, from housing to food to transport. What within those are the most important thing to that particular community? And once they've identified that, looking around at what others are doing. So read our report that's coming out early in the new year, and then thirdly, trying to figure out what the kind of enabling support is in the local area and get in touch with those that can provide the help and resources once. But I think the first thing is to kind of recognise what are the actions, what are the things that are going to most benefit, or what project most benefit them, aside just from climate, whether it's food or rewilding or transport or building homes or whatever. Brilliant.
Natalie?
I mean, I utterly agree with the consultation, but some of the things I'd put forward as a suggestion we haven't talked a lot about home energy efficiency, but this is a total no-brainer in terms of it saves carbon, but it saves people energy bills, you know, saves costs on the NHS, saves people's health. And I'll just refer to a report launch I was at a week or so back, the MCS Charitable Foundation, which is quite new, but they were stressing very much the importance, if people are going to improve the home energy efficiency of their homes, even if you're going to get landlords doing that, you need a one-stop shop where you've got ideally local people who understand the local housing stock and can offer real advice. You know, people want to have a warmer, more comfortable home, but it's really hard to know where to start. Where do you find a reliable builder? What are the benefits? How's it all going to work? So, you know, one of the things that you know, so many communities would benefit from would be having that experience. And, you know, we've seen groups do everything from sort of basic draft busting kind of stuff, which is quite simple and quite cheap to do. But what that can also do, again, is be creating opportunities for training, creating opportunities for jobs in local communities. So homes, you know, the quality of our housing stock in Britain is absolutely atrocious. And most of the rest of Europe is not like that. And it's something we've got to fix for the climate, but also very much for people's lives. And also on the food side of things, you know, it'd be, you know, a nice Christmas present would be a whole heap of bare-rooted fruit trees that you can plant around in the community so people can pick food for themselves, sort of, you know, perhaps develop a bit of an incredible edible scheme like they did from Todman and that's now spread around the world. So, you know, housing and food would be 2 of the areas I'd really focus on. And, you know, what better could you focus on Christmas than being warm, comfortable and well fed?
Lovely. And also, I think those two examples are ones which can boost up new forms of social interaction, off the back of which new ideas will come. So if you start with something that gets people talking, you'll get more ideas, which is often the case. We've got a question or a comment from David Lum. I know he's got something he wanted to say. Do you want to speak up?
Yes, thanks, Alice. Can you hear me? Yeah, good. Well done. Just to say, I like Mark Pepper. I like what he says. I've been collecting Mark Peppers over a number of years now in this country. Unfortunately, I can count them on probably two hands, and it's not enough. We need more Mark Peppers. So that's a fairly glib sort of thing to say, although I mean it sincerely for you, Mark. I do a similar thing in Leeds with a more sort of citywide and more urban-based action group called the Leeds Sustainable Development Group. It's a community interest company where we try to do the myriad of things that need to be done to create sustainability in the way we live in our communities. And it seems to me there's this, we suffer, don't we, from an incredible national parochialism. And I know this from my work with the Academy of Urbanism, where I travel. I have been traveling throughout Europe for the last decade, looking at other cities to come back to Leeds to see if we can do the same. But it's a cultural thing. And the problem is, take Aarhus, the second city of Denmark, for instance. They have 34 local citizens' councils, and that consists of a room or a series of rooms or spaces throughout the city where members, officers, and local leaders and citizens meet regularly every week to discuss how they're going to do things to make things better on a general front. And that is, that is real localism. We had a Localism Act nearly 10 years ago now, and Mark is quite right. The local plan system is a token. It doesn't get to grips with the things, and there's this. We don't have a mutual respect between those who govern us and we who are being governed, like they do in places like Denmark and Holland and other cities. It's a cultural thing, so we're not going to solve that in this question. My question is, what can the local people, the question is, what do we deliver in the new year to make a difference? But we've got to get the government, our leaders, and maybe I should look at Natalie here, who is the closest thing we've got to a national leader. How do we get the power down to the local people like Mark? And there's so many latent Marks in this country who are not empowered to do anything because they don't have a voice, they don't have the resource, they don't have the finance, and they don't have the support. In Aarhus, there are 7 aldermen on the council of that city. One of those aldermen's title is Alderman Responsible for Citizen Involvement. So one thing we could deliver, Natalie, can you bring this up with the government, is that every council should make one councillor responsible for citizen involvement, and that should be on their title. The guy who does it in Aarhus was a 9-year-old immigrant from Palestine who didn't speak a word of Danish or English. He's now a graduate, he's 37 years old, and he's the Alderman for Citizen Involvement, a very inspiring man. And the result is 34 local citizens' councils in the city. And that is true devolution. The devolution we're getting is just another tier in the gap between government and the local community. Sorry, that was a speech rather than a question, but maybe Natalie.
It's a very good one though, but we're running out of time, so I'm going to make you stop and hand it to the speakers.
Yeah.
Right, you've got 1 minute each, and I'm going to go to Natalie first, sitting in Westminster. How do we make more Marks?
Well, I think what we have to do is start with Westminster. And there's a bit of a risk at the moment. Some people are saying all democracy's failed, and there's some dangerous currents around that. I would say that, before we give up on democracy, let's make the UK a democracy. Let's have a parliament in Westminster that actually reflects the will of the people. Electoral reform, political reform sounds like a long way away from dealing with the reality of a community in Bristol. But actually, we've got to say it's not that what's happening now is the fault is at the centre. The centre is failing, and so if you ask me to come and talk about algae, and say, what's the answer? My answer will be democracy. We have to, people who voted to take back control in 2016, although I entirely disagree with the result, they were expressing the fact that they're not in control of their own communities, their own lives. And I don't think just creating a councillor on each council responsible for community involvement will work, because those councils just don't have enough power. And they don't have enough power because the voters don't have enough power in Westminster. So we have to address the huge democratic deficit at all levels in our society. And we have to get across to the idea that politics should be what you do, not have done to you. That's a big national project, but we can also do that at the absolute most local scale. If any individual can work with a street and say, you want to do something about this street, you want to get a pedestrian crossing for that dangerous route so the kids can get to the park. If you can help people to do that, then they see that they can do politics, they can make a difference. So we need to work from the top and the bottom and meet in the middle in a democratic United Kingdom.
I have a colleague who keeps trying to inflict a very complicated diagram on everyone of bottom up and top down going on together, which I refuse to let him use, but it's a similar sentiment. Mark, do you have any thoughts on how we can clone you?
Well, first of all, be careful what you wish for, because I'm not too sure you want to see too many more Mark Peppers. Policy from national government is one thing, but I think they have attempted. I'm no expert, but I believe they've attempted to devolve power down to local authorities, which is great. But I think that's where our problem has lied for many, many years, and that's that control that the local authorities have, and the policies and procedures that we've had to go through have been absolutely, incredibly difficult and challenging. It's only because we had a change of administration of late that we've managed to achieve what we've achieved. So for me, yeah, I'm sure there's problems with national government and the policies that they impose on us. But for me, more close to home is local authority. And how do we get local authority power and permissions and assets that they hold on our behalf to work better for local communities like mine? So no expert, but that's my thought.
Thank you, and it's actually something I was reflecting we hadn't really talked much about. So maybe something people will pick up in the more informal chat later. Luke, any final thoughts from you?
Thanks. I agree with everything that's been said. So I think I would just say we need to keep making and attempting to win the argument around why community action is so important. And going back to what I said earlier, it's not just about control and it being the right thing to do, that people have involvement in the process. It's actually about the better outcomes that are delivered as a result that Mark has highlighted. So that means showing the difference that are being made in communities across the country without, even without that enabling framework and the benefits of doing so. And also working really hard, and it's something that Mark highlighted, around inclusion and diversity. So to make it clear that this isn't just for certain types of people, actually everyone can be involved in this. It's not just for kind of well-off communities. Everyone, admittedly, everyone needs a different level of resources and help to do that, but recognizing that and making it as broader kind of an involving movement as possible in order to help and win the argument to achieve the kind of political change that Natalie spoke about as well.
Thank you. It's been a really good discussion. Thank you so much. I mean, there's so much that we haven't missed out because it is difficult and it is complicated, this sort of thing that we're talking about. I remember, this is a very retro comment. Some of you will think I'm very old to say this, but I remember when people started talking about big society. It was very much the conservative thing for a while. And it sounds great, but it takes work. And that's what, those of us who've been working on community action for years just turned around and went, yes, it's great, isn't it? But you need to give us money and you need to give us resources and you need to make doing community work less difficult, because as Mark said, so many things you have to go through to build a community solar farm, and it can sap even the most energetic of people. I will hand over now though to Susie at Big Tent, and she can take us through the rest of it. Thank you, Susie, for organising it. It's been a great session.